Hello and welcome to Module 4 of the course. We are already past our halfway mark, just a couple more weeks left, so that's very exciting. Well done to you. And this week is going to be all about conducting reflective cycles of inquiry. I'm going to start by giving you a bit of an introduction to the TSETA-PAC, the Teacher Scheme for Educational Dialogue Analysis. I'm going to talk a little bit about self-audits. I'm going to review the steps and the purpose of conducting reflective inquiries, and we're going to discuss ways of incorporating reflective inquiries into your facilitation plan. Your objective this week is really to further develop your facilitation plan and consider the ways in which that you can support your colleagues in conducting reflective inquiries into their practice. So the first thing that we're going to discuss today is the TSETA-PAC, because I think it will be helpful to give you more of an introduction, since I have consistently and will continue to refer to the PAC contents and have included different sections in the different week's reading materials in the resources section. So the TSETA-PAC, which is now available in English, Spanish, Chinese, and I think also French now, it offers varied resources, different case studies, and a lot of different editable templates to guide practitioners in conducting an inquiry into their practice. The figure you can see here summarizes the PAC contents. There's a user guide, which includes a helpful introduction to educational dialogue. I included that section of the PAC in last week's resources, so it might look familiar. There are the core resources, which I will expand on more in a moment. And there are many additional resources, guidance, and examples offered throughout the PAC. So do take a look and become familiar with it, because it will become your close friend when you are guiding your colleagues through conducting reflective inquiries. And remember that you can also adapt and add to any of the materials in the PAC as well, based off of the unique needs and the interests of your colleagues and settings. So it's really about taking the needs assessments that you did last week and applying those findings to adapt the PAC contents where needed. Also, just to say that the PAC can be used by any teachers of any age group, from your early years to adult learners. It can be applicable for formal face-to-face learning or online learning settings, as well as informal settings like children's clubs, for example. There are plenty of examples included throughout the PAC for how it's been used previously, so take a look, and there might be something helpful to align with your specific context that you can then share with your colleagues. So going back to the core resources of the PAC, here's a visual overview. So as you can see, there are 3 core resources or tools in the TSETA-PAC. The first is the self-audit, and that's to help identify what your students' dialogue and your own practice is currently like. So you'll give a self-audit to your colleagues to do. The second is the reflective cycle for classroom inquiry, which uses a step-by-step reflective cycle to transform practice, and also importantly keep a record of how that happens. Then third, there's the coding scheme to identify key dialogic features, which we'll focus on more in next week's module. And that's to really help identify moments of high quality dialogue in your setting, as well as the conditions that create these. In this module, we're going to be looking at tools 1 and 2 in a little bit more detail, and then, as I mentioned, focus a bit more on tool 3, the coding scheme, in next week's module. This next segment is all about the self-audit. So apologies if this image is a bit hard to see, but I've also included a downloadable and an editable version of the template in the resources section for you to share with your colleagues. The self-audit of practice is what you should have your colleagues fill out before they engage with any materials regarding educational dialogue. So you could have them do this as a first activity if you hold an initial workshop, for example. The self-audit, as you can see, it asks a series of questions regarding dialogue in your setting. And this can be really helpful to look at the results of in order to focus inquiries and to monitor what happens as your colleagues go along. So the idea is that your colleagues would fill this same self-audit out after completing their reflective inquiries, so that they can systematically reflect on their progress or any further areas maybe that they'd like to work on to develop their dialogic teaching approaches. The guidance from the TSETA pack will be particularly useful as you plan these self-audits for your colleagues, because you'll see a few considerations in there and recommendations for engaging in this for the first time. And so you can really build on that and contextualize it for your setting specifically. I've also included a link to another video resource from the edudialogue.org site below in the resources section, and that just gives a bit more information on the self-audit. It brings you through why it's important and how to use the results. So please do take a look at that. Also, I should say facilitators feel like you can fill out the self-audit as well. And you can just do that with the lens of creating a dialogic environment to support your colleagues in leading their own inquiries. And you can adapt the questions as needed, but it would be probably nice for you to have your own monitoring tool to track your own progress as a facilitator. Okay, so this next part is about reflective inquiries. What is a reflective inquiry? By reflective inquiry, I refer to individual self-reflection as well as collaborative professional development between teacher colleagues. It's very well suited to situations where teachers have identified a particular interest or a concern maybe about classroom talk. And so by having very focused inquiry questions and conducting an investigation to look at these questions, they can really build a very good understanding of what is actually happening in their classroom, and unpack that in a way that would be helpful for working on and having very targeted activities to strengthen whatever they're interested in. If it's challenging, having students challenge each other more, having students build on each other's ideas more, or whatever. So the next image that I'll show you has the actual steps to conducting a reflective inquiry. So you can see it now here. It has 6 different steps, and I've also put a copy of this resource in the read section, by the way, so that you can view the questions a little bit more easily. Step 1 is about identifying interests and aims, which are narrowed in step 2. Step 3 involves designing the inquiry plan and the methods to investigate it. Step 4 is about considering the results of the inquiry and reflecting on what it means for practice. Step 5 involves making an action plan for what to do next based off of these results. And in step 6, the practitioner reviews the process and considers their learning and what could be potentially done differently. I will now show you an example of a reflective inquiry, and again, we'll also include it in the resources section so that you can read the details on your own following this video. But I always like using an example because it really shows you what can happen and the helpfulness of having very narrowed and specific goals. So this teacher has described her interest and aims at the top box of the cycle that you can see here. She notes that when she tries to encourage children of different abilities to work together, the higher attaining child tends to just tell those that are struggling to answer. In the next box, she refines her focus and questions for her inquiry by coming up with specific research questions. And you'll notice that some of these questions, like the first one on building on ideas, is really helpfully aligned with the coding framework. The coding framework was this one you would have seen in last week's module. And it's really helpful to think about these categories prior to conducting inquiries and deciding on the focus, because it can help refine the questions, and then it will make gathering data much easier since the questions will directly relate to the coding scheme. And I've included the full coding scheme, which looks like an extended version of this table, in the read section below, but you would have also seen it in last week's module. The third box, going back to the example, is about the inquiry plan and methods. For this teacher, she planned to observe children doing pair work and identified 2 tools from the TSETA pack to help her gather the data and track student participation. You can see in the 4th box that she has included the results of her data collection. She found children rarely build on ideas, and there's very little participation from lower attaining children. She then summarizes her action plan, which is to create ground rules together to talk about how dialogue can help all learners, to introduce sentence stems, and to develop a meta-awareness of the benefits of dialogue in the classroom. And this is really helpful to see how the interpretation of her data has led to specific actions she will take in the classroom. And in the final box, of course, she summarizes her review process, including some new questions to perhaps focus on in her next reflective cycle. I would say to really make sure to tell your colleagues to not be too ambitious in their inquiries or too unfocused, and you might need to help them and support them in focusing and narrowing down their questions. There's always more reflective inquiries that they can do following the previous one. So the idea is that they have a very specific and narrowed focus that they can easily collect data for, and then if they want to focus on something else for the next reflective cycle, they can do that. There's a new expanded section on choosing an inquiry focus in the updated version of the TSETA pack, and that is included in the resources section below. So as facilitators, there are different steps that you can take in supporting your colleagues in conducting reflective inquiries. This visual that you can see here is a draft I developed. I've also included a version below. It offers questions that you can ask yourselves during the reflective cycles of your colleagues. And an important takeaway from the TSETA trials with facilitators is to make sure you're providing plenty of opportunities for peer discussion and sharing throughout the planning and the implementation of the inquiries, as well as following the completion of the inquiries in order to reflect on the results together as a group and to derive key learning together from that experience. So step 1 involves you providing support to your colleagues in identifying their interests and aims. Step 2 is helping teachers narrow their focus and questions. Step 3 will look at supporting your colleagues in designing their plan and the methods they'll use for gathering the data. Step 4 involves supporting teachers in interpreting the data they collect in order to answer their inquiry questions, and also providing a lot of opportunity for teachers to reflect on and share the results of their inquiries and the implications for their students in practice. And that could be through a workshop, for example, or an online sharing event with your colleagues, whatever you think might work best for your setting. Step 5 will need you to consider how to support teachers in identifying and making a plan to address areas for improvement that came out of the findings from their inquiries, as well as thinking together how best to refine the inquiry process for next time. So there might be amendments that you want to make, for example, to the process. And finally, in step 6, identify the key areas of learning together, the successes, the challenges that came out of the process, and make sure that you're capturing and you're documenting these in a way that is easily mobilized for others to draw on. And it will be important to identify what teachers will do and what they will focus on next. So that's a lot of information. It's a lot for you to think about. That's it for me for this week's video, but have a think through how you would support your colleagues in conducting reflective inquiries. What are some of the challenges that you might see, and how can you mitigate for those? What kind of workshops should you do, and what support can you give for sharing the learning and building on that learning for following reflective inquiries as well? As always, please feel free to reach out to me with any questions by email or on the discussion forum. The discussion forum is really a great avenue for this, and you have the opportunity to share your learning with your peers as well. So thank you so much, and I will see you in week 5.